Hello, welcome to Jazz Is
Jazz's
MasterClass series
at the National Jazz Museum at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem.
I am Sekou McMillan, the curator of special projects.
My name is Albert Marquez, Zack O'Farrell.
My name is Shirazette Titten.
And we are in conversation with the legendary Bertha Hope. Jazz could only have happened here in America.
The key to everything was the radio.
So this world is too dense. 15 minutes isn't enough to cover it all.
Are you ready? I am.
We have this parallel music developing, right? It's hard to draw a very distinct line between some streams of early jazz and so on, right? There's so many similarities. So welcome back to part 2 of the jazz history tree, focusing on Latin jazz this time. In this segment, we're going to be talking about one city. Last time we talked about 2 cities, New Orleans and Havana. Today we're talking about New York City, my birthplace, my hometown, but a little context of how we get to New York City. So, New Orleans and Havana, sister cities connected by ferry. We have this parallel music developing, right? It's hard to draw a very distinct line between some streams of early jazz and so on, right? There's so many similarities that if the development stayed in both cities, who knows what these musics would sound like today. They might be a lot more, they might have stayed a lot more connected. However, post World War I, we have the Great Migration out from the South out to cities like Kansas City, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, right? So we have a separation of these musics, right? Havana stays the center of Cuban music. That stays the place where Cuban music begins to be recorded for the first time. That stays the place where the music develops. It stays the place where people experiment with larger composition, and this music stays the place where son exists, and develops. But for jazz, now we have this development happening in other cities. We have Kansas City with Count Basie. We have Chicago with King Oliver, right? And then we have New York, where New York becomes a major center, the birthplace of bebop. Now, in the 40s, we start having waves of immigration of Cuban musicians, not just musicians, all sorts of Cubans, but particularly, for our purposes, we're going to talk about the musicians who started migrating to New York in the 40s, because it's when these musics start to meet up again, right? So the first person we're gonna have to talk about actually is Mario Balsa. Mario Balsa was the first of the Cuban musicians to move to New York and really start playing with jazz musicians, right? Mario Balsa started playing with Cab Calloway. He became friends with Dizzy Gillespie, right? He started working in the jazz scene as a black man from Cuba, right? So often when we think of jazz versus Latin music, it doesn't occur to us that many of these early Cuban musicians coming to New York, they came to New York, and until you heard them speak, they were black men, right? And so that was a world that was easier for them to enter. That was a world that it made more sense for these musicians to enter. And it was a world where they felt more, where they felt more at home, felt more connection. Now, Mario Balsa was responsible for introducing the second important name that we're going to talk to on the Latin side of things. He's responsible for connecting our second and third name together. No order. There's no hierarchy here. I'm not concerned about who did more than who. I'm not concerned about who got there first. This is all this stuff in a pot together cooking, right? So Mario Balsa was responsible for introducing Dizzy Gillespie and the Cuban percussionist Chano Pozo. Chano Pozo was a percussionist from El Solar de Africa in the Cayo Hueso neighborhood of Centro Habana in Havana, right? Now, Chano Pozo was a deep cat. Chano Pozo was a percussionist with roots in La Regla de Ocha, the one of the Yoruban religions, in very active and alive to this day in Cuba. He was an hijo de Chango. So he always had a red bandana with him. Red is the color of Shango. He always had the red bandana with him. He was an incredible percussionist who was highly regarded in the folkloric and popular music spheres in Havana. He was the first person to ever record a rumba. He wrote hit songs in Havana and decided to move to New York. In New York, Mario Bausa put him in touch with Dizzy Gillespie, the one and only, who was looking for a conguero. Dizzy Gillespie was one of the most forward-looking minds in jazz. He was the one who recognized these connections between the jazz that we associate as being born in New Orleans with the music that was flourishing throughout the Americas. Dizzy Gillespie is the one who started, is the first one who really started making deliberate attempts to connect these dots. So Mario Bausa introduces Chano Pozo to Dizzy Gillespie. Chano Pozo joins Dizzy's band, playing congas, having a great link up with drummers like Kenny Clark and Max Roach. And Dizzy and Chano together write tunes like Manteca, Tintindeo. They introduce bass lines into this music. They introduce choros. They introduce these polyphonic horn lines across sections. Unfortunately, Chano Pozo joins Dizzy's band in late 1947. And while on tour in the South with Dizzy's band, gets very disillusioned with being treated as a second-class citizen in the South for being a black man. So he leaves the tour early, comes in December of 1948, comes back to New York, and unfortunately, in a drug deal gone wrong, winds up shot and dead. And we lose Chano Pozo. Who knows the output that these two geniuses would have created had they had more time together. However, at the same time, we have these Cuban musicians like Mario Bausa, like his brother-in-law Frank Grillo, also known as Machito, like my own grandfather Chico Farril, who are enamored with jazz, who love the sound, who are huge fans of Dizzy's big band, who are huge fans of Cab Calloway, who are huge fans of Duke Ellington, and admire this big band sound. So we have musicians like Machito forming big bands. Machito, Tito Rodriguez, Tito Puente. These were the big three of the Palladium, which is this hugely important dance hall nightclub on 52nd Street, the same street as all the jazz clubs, right? The same street where you have Bird and Diz playing gigs every night. Same street where you have Miles Davis playing gigs. Same street where Max Roach is playing. Same street where Roy Haynes is playing, right? So what do we have? We have these black musicians from Cuba, right? Like I said before, Machito and his Afro-Cubans. It's called Afro-Cuban because the Afro-Cuban is like saying African-American. It refers to black Cubans, right? When Machito and his Afro-Cubans hit the scene, it was like, oh, this is, jazz musicians were like, oh, these are our brothers. These are like our cousins. They just happen to speak Spanish. These are our people. They just have a different thing going on from us. And so we had this mutual admiration going on at this time, right? You had we can point even to specific examples, right? Probably my favorite jazz drummer of all time, Roy Haynes, right? Roy Haynes is still with us to this day. I think he just turned 99, if I'm not mistaken. So that means, he was playing gigs in the 40s. In fact, Roy Haynes has played the entire history of jazz. Roy Haynes played with Pops, And he's still playing to this day. He played with Chick Corea. He still plays to this day with cats in his band like Jaleel Shaw, like Martin Bejarano, who's a Cuban pianist from Miami, right? David Wong. So he embodies the whole history of jazz. He was there on 52nd Street in the 40s and 50s. He would go between sets to the Palladium and hang out and check out the music. Roy Haynes was good friends with Ubaldo Nieto, the timbalero for Machito's orchestra. They would check each other out. So we see Roy Haynes incorporating timbale techniques into his playing when he plays with the cross stick on the snare drum and the other stick on the head of the drum going across the snare drum and the floor tom. When he does stuff like that, that's borrowed from timbales. And this, by the same token, Ubaldo Nieto starts expanding on the cowbell pattern, right? He's not just playing ging 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 ging. He's expanding ging 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 ging, right? He's expanding on the cowbell pattern the same way that Roy Haynes starts opening up the ride cymbal pattern. So you have this vibrant like exchange between these musicians happening, right? And so it's this extraordinarily fruitful period. You have, then, you know, one could even say it culminates that this particular period culminates with a composition by my grandfather called the Afro-Cuban Jazz Suite, which is a piece that really synthesizes the more progressive, adventurous sounds of the big band jazz world, sounds being explored by composers like Duke Ellington and Stan Kenton and Count Basie, with the rhythm and dynamism and also adventurous sounds being explored by bands like Machito and Tito Puente and Tito Rodriguez, right? My grandfather was named Arturo Chico O'Farrill. He was from Cuba. He came here. I want to say he came to New York in 48 or 49, but I'm not sure of the specific year. He wrote this very compositionally dense extended work called the Afro-Cuban Jazz Suite that featured as soloists Charlie Parker, Flip Phillips, and Buddy Rich with Machito's orchestra. And it's an extended work. It's not a riff chart. It's not a head in with solos and head out. It's an extended work that is exploring to the max the jazz idiom with the Latin idiom. You have that together. Other culminations of this time for me is an artist like Tito Rodriguez, who for me reminds me of someone like Frank Sinatra, right? If you, for my money, Tito Rodriguez's orchestra is like taking Frank Sinatra with the Count Basie orchestra and putting it in clave, right? So we have all these artists doing incredible work that is truly bringing these two cousin musics back together. This is just bringing the family back together for a cookout on 52nd Street in New York. And it's a time I wish I could see, but market forces, the diminishing of jazz as a popular music, with the expansion of rock and other popular musics, and the social separations between Black Americans and Latinos are going to lead to another separation of sorts of these musics, even within New York City. And so in our next episode, I'm going to talk to you about what that looks like and then how they come back together again in another few decades.